Starting off, though, with Dr. 𝐏𝐬𝐲𝐝 Das. 𝐏𝐬𝐲𝐝, thank you again for being a part of this show. And I want to come on to Lucy Letby's parents in just a moment, because you made a really insightful comment about that in today's Telegraph. But let's start off with prison, because I know that's a setting with which you are familiar. People forget that Lucy Letby has been behind bars since, 2020. Her sentence tomorrow, it's being expected that she'll get a whole of life and be only one of, I think, four women who've ever had that. She doesn't just get locked up and that's the end of it. They're talking about things like putting on suicide watch, what have you. What does happen? I mean, she's been in, I believe, 4 different prisons. Is she likely to become notorious? Is she likely to become a figure of hate? What happens behind bars? Because people just say, lock her up and throw away the key. But that's really where the story begins, as far as you're concerned.
Yeah, sure. So thank you for having me on your show. It's always a pleasure. It's a shame that it has to be for such a heart-wrenching and shocking case. To answer your question, absolutely, she's going to be very high profile. She's going to be notorious. Every single other prisoner in there is going to know who she is, regardless of whether they're interested in general news or not. There's a hierarchy amongst prisoners, and I would say that it's much more pronounced in the male prison estate than the female one. But still, people who commit sexual offences and people who hurt babies are seen by other prisoners as the lowest of the low. So I'm fairly sure that she's going to be targeted. People are going to want to, especially the antisocial, violent women, are going to want to hand out some street justice because of their own kind of ethical structure, but also because they like to get kudos. So if you get to attack somebody like this, then especially in certain gangs, then you're seen as somebody that's done something positive for the world. So that's one thing. I've worked with some quite high-profile female prisoners, including Joanna Dennehy, and she was absolutely notorious. Everyone knew who she was.
We just should remind people who she was. I mean, and she's somebody who did get a whole of life sentence. Am I right?
That's right, yeah.
What did she do? She killed, I'm just having a quick look just to remind myself, but if you can remind us what she did.
She went on a killing spree several years ago, and she already had a criminal history of a lot of violence, and she just decided that she wanted to randomly kill men. So I believe she killed 4 men within a very short period around her hometown. And she was just a very scary individual. She was very calm and collected while she did this. At one point, she went into a petrol station during the middle of a killing spree, and she was, having banter with and flirting with the attendant there. So something very bone-chilling about her. But she feels different to Lucy Letby, I would say.
When you say feels different, in what way?
Well, Lucy Letby, and this is quite a scary thing to consider, didn't have any kind of external ways of showing that she was a violent or unstable person. She didn't have a criminal record. She wasn't aggressive. She wasn't hostile. There was no known history of trauma. And in fact, people thought before she did what she did, before she started killing these little babies, these innocent individuals, she was actually quite a competent nurse. She was seen as very, normal, quote unquote. So that's what makes it even scarier for me. It's really hard to pick out somebody like that if they're not telegraphing their intentions.
No, it's interesting, isn't it? Because when the original quote-unquote angel of death, Beverly Allen, the similarities with Lucy Letby is that she maintained her innocence all the way through until right at the end, when I understand she was confronted with several of the killings, and she basically said, no, I didn't do all of those. I only did all of these ones. Is that unusual, the I'm innocent and maintaining innocence in this amongst murderers? Or is that, do they readily sort of say, oh, okay, I did it? Or are they often maintaining their innocence? Maybe, I don't know, are they fooling themselves, or are they continuing to want to fool other people? What's going on there?
Sure. So I think you could basically class people who have killed murderers into two groups. There are some who are relatively proud of what they've done or indifferent, and they might plead not guilty for obvious reasons. That, they don't want to go to prison. But once they've been found guilty, they know the game's up. So they will confess quite openly to their crimes. And then you have people like Beverly Arlett and like Lucy Letby, who, well, as far as we know for Lucy, she's certainly not confessed to them, and I don't think she will, at least no time, not in the near future. And I think that's denial. So it's a defense mechanism. It's a psychological defense mechanism. I think deep down, she obviously knows what she's done. She knows the facts behind the case, but she's still emotionally invested in being offended at being accused.
And is that because if you're a nurse, you're this, and this? She has, whereas, somebody, and I guess like a Wayne Couzens or anyone in a position of a moral authority and authority, they have a uniform, they have a status, and they are more wedded to that, or they wed themselves to that status so solidly that anything outside that is, no, they couldn't have done it.
I think it depends. It's the different people within healthcare have different motivations. So these cases obviously are exceptionally rare. You mentioned Beverly Arlett. So she, as you might know, had Munchausen's by proxy, right? So she had a mental illness, which means that it got some sort of thrill of being around the grieving process. So she liked witnessing empathy towards her victims and sort of absorbing some of that empathy. So
but
she's one example.
Didn't Lucy Letby also show that, or what we've heard, what's reported?
Not quite, I don't think. I don't think she had a mental... Well, we know she had anxiety and depression in the background, and she was treated.
No, but I mean, the whole thing of being around the grieving parents. I mean, reportedly, that's where things started to get a little odd, like wanting to stay around with them, looking them up on Facebook, etc. Sure, I'm not saying, I'm not asking you to give her a prognosis, but I'm just alerted to the similarities in that kind of getting off on the grief, if I can put it that way. Yeah.
So I think there's a huge overlap between her and Beverly Arlett. The way that they carried out the killings was eerily similar. So we're talking about air emboli, injecting insulin. In terms of the motivation, I think there's an overlap. So they both liked being part of that process. But I'd say the difference is that I think that for Lucy Letby, it was more about power and control and being around the grief. So she magically kind of appeared at these deaths, and sometimes even when babies were dying that weren't her patients. Whereas I think it was similar but slightly different for Beverly Arlett, because it wasn't about the grief, it was about the sympathy and the empathy. So she liked being in the victim role, and the term by proxy means you do it through somebody else, right? So she got a thrill from seeing the babies being victimized.
Oh, now what about people like, when we look at Harold Shipman, for instance, it does seem to be the babies or the elderly. And we're not for a minute suggesting that everybody in healthcare is at risk, but with these cases, do they go for it sounds like an obvious question, those likely to put up the least resistance? I think Harold Shipman definitely did. So he, as we know, picked on exclusively elderly individuals. Lucy Letby obviously did, but there are some that didn't. So you've probably heard of Charles Cullen. He is a nurse who killed, I believe he had 29 confirmed victims, but people suspect that there's about 40 different people in New Jersey. He was arrested in 2003. The Netflix film that you might have heard of, A Good Nurse, was based on him. Yeah. So he had lots of different victims, most of whom were relatively healthy. I believe 2 of them were children. And so he would be, what he said was that his reasoning was because he was on a mission of mercy, right? So he felt that he's putting these individuals out of their misery, and they weren't particularly vulnerable individuals. So even when we speak about it out loud, it doesn't really make logical sense. And another person that jumps to mind is a German nurse called Niles Hogle. So he killed about 85 people between 2000 and 2005. And his reasoning was simply boredom. And he wanted to show off his skills at resuscitation. Yeah, absolutely. It's mind-blowing, isn't it? So, I mean, where do you start? I'm not saying that we're not talking specifically about anybody that you work with. Where the hell do you start? I mean, what are you trying to discover? I mean, everybody wants to know why, and everybody goes, I'm sure there are conversations up and down the country about the whys of Lucy Letby. And I've said before, if she didn't look the way she did, like butter wouldn't melt, she probably wouldn't have got away with things for so long. And I think that's the thing that different people, everybody knows somebody who looks like her. You know, she's not stand out in any particular way. So vanilla, hiding in plain sight. Those were her protections.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really hard to spot somebody doing something this heinous. Firstly, because people don't expect it. You know, people assume competence, and they assume that people have empathy. They wouldn't do this kind of evil act. So that's the first problem. And also, especially people like Lucy Letby, Charles Cullen, in fact, most of the people that we've talked about, they didn't telegraph their intentions. It's not like they were antisocial, violent people outside of work who had a criminal history. In fact, they probably couldn't work in healthcare if they did. So it's really hard to spot. But I think in Lucy Letby's case, as we all know, concerns were raised. You know, these senior doctors did say there's something going on here, and they were not only ignored, but they were forced to apologize. So, you know, even in the small cases where we're lucky enough to have somebody pick up on this behavior, if the system and the hospital managers don't support the people that are making the accusations, then, you know, what's the point of having a whistleblowing system in the first place? Yeah,
it doesn't go anywhere. And just to finish off, her parents, and that this is what you remarked on in the Telegraph, the fact that they were shocked as well. You know, that people so close can be still shocked. And I'm about to talk about all her colleagues and what they may be going through and what have you. Another thing is, how can people so close not pick up anything? I mean, that's going to be the question that people are asking. And her friends and colleagues and even family are going to be judged because people are going to think, nah, you must have known something. But they can hide literally in plain sight.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. When we talk about serial killers, they fit into two broad categories: organized and disorganized. And generally, the disorganized serial killers are the people who live on the fringes of society, who are quite impulsive, who, you know, struggle with other offenses, struggle with their emotions and their temper. And then you have organized serial killers like Lucy Letby, who don't really have any external sign. So unfortunately, there's not really a clear way of knowing, I don't think. And I'm not surprised that her parents didn't have any clue, and I'm not surprised that they were so shocked. But it is also, I don't know, it's quite difficult to imagine what the rest of their life is going to be like, because they're going to be judged regardless if they knew or not. They're going to be tarnished. You know, people are going to say there's no smoke without fire.
Yeah, absolutely. 𝐏𝐬𝐲𝐜𝐡, thank you so much for that. It gives you a lot to think about. 𝐏𝐬𝐲𝐜𝐡 Das there, I know, absolutely brilliant forensic psychiatrist who works within prisons. One of the issues that he brought up is the friends and family and people close to Lucy Letby are going to be judged and will probably be going through their own versions of hell. And that's what we are going to be talking about right after this.